Hey guys, welcome to SheKnowsArsenal. My name is Jessica and I'm your host. You can follow me on Twitter at JacinioTweets and at SheKnowsArsenal. Welcome to another episode. We are going to be talking all about Charlie Patino and some other Arsenal transfer news. So make sure you guys like this video and subscribe to the channel. Now, yes, I've been a little bit detached from Arsenal over the last couple of days just because Man City wasn't the greatest and, the title feels kind of done at the moment. And so I think there's almost like a collective, just shut down off of the season. So I do realize that we play Chelsea tomorrow, but quite frankly, it's just kind of like, I don't know. But we'll do like a little preview for that tomorrow before the game. So yeah. But today, there is a report that came out from David Ornstein saying that Charlie Patino, the 19-year-old Arsenal academy graduate that's playing at Blackpool, is set to leave Arsenal permanently this summer. The 19-year-old wants regular first team action, unlikely for now, at Arsenal, and prefers not to exit AFC on loan again. Club receptive and ready to help facilitate as interest builds from UK and abroad. And so there's been a lot of, I think, mixed emotions and reactions to this. Charlie Patino, I'm not about to sit here and lie to y'all and say that I've been watching every single game Blackpool has played, because I haven't. So I'm not like that. If I haven't watched him, I haven't watched him, right? But he seems to have done well, by all accounts. I know that they were relegated, but he made a good account of himself. The manager really liked him. He had 2 goals and 4 assists. 9 yellows and 1 red card. That's interesting. And so, yeah, he's made a good account of himself, to the point where he backs himself to leave Arsenal and activate his career. And I don't blame any young player for, taking responsibility for their progression and, not settling for squad minutes or going out in another loan. If you feel like you're ready, go ahead and do it. You know what I mean? And so I cannot begrudge Charlie Patino, after having a good loan spell, for wanting to do that. But what this means to me is that, if Arsenal are willing to facilitate this move for Charlie Patino, is that the club are less invested in Charlie Patino than the fans are, which often becomes the case with academy graduates. We get attached to these names and, people come out with all these threads and, comps and stuff like that, trying to convince people that these are the next guys that are going to step into the squad and they can definitely make it at Arsenal. And when it doesn't happen, people are afraid that if we sell these players, we're losing out on the next Gnabry, right? And that's exactly what I've seen today, is people saying, oh, this is another Gnabry situation. We're going to totally regret this. I think that's a total overreaction, to be honest. Gnabry was a very specific scenario that happened. And I don't think Charlie Patino, even playing with Arsenal, although it was a small sample size, only once against Sunderland in the dying minutes of that game, and then also against Nottingham Forest in the Cup, where I saw anything like an elite level player. I saw a young kid that needs more development. And so calling him Gnabry at this point feels a little bit disingenuous. I've also seen, selling Patino to keep Vieira and Lakanga as criminal. Now, you guys know my favorite thing on this channel is to kind of debunk all these little, oh, I want to connect this to this so I could have a gross overreaction to something when they have no connection to each other whatsoever. And connecting Charlie Patino to Vieira and Lakanga is just that, a gross overreaction. My thoughts on this really are that, most Highlanders don't make it at Arsenal. And it's a very small sample size of those who go straight from, the academy straight into the first team. And then there's another group that goes out on loan maybe once and then makes it into the first team and then also starts. So it's not an easy pathway. And I think we almost have this unrealistic expectation about if they're talented, they should go into the first team. Like, the reason why we've had to use so much of our youngsters is because our recruitment has been so bad in the first team. And we have greatly benefited from that, especially when you think of from the outlook on, Bukayo Saka. Had things happened differently, he would not be what he is today. Do you know what I mean? He might not even be at Arsenal. He wasn't even one of the main names of guys coming through the academy that people were talking about. So, everything works out for a reason. But, if Arsenal were not as bad as they were in 2019, 2020, then we wouldn't have needed Emile Smith Rowe and Bukayo Saka and Martinelli, who's not a Highlander, to kind of like carry us and save us. So the idea that like that's the normal thing is to have like three, or more academy graduates in your first team when you're trying to, compete in Champions League and Premier League and stuff like that is very unrealistic, right? And there's very few examples of these types of players that become superstars for Arsenal, right? I asked that question online, like which Highlanders have left to go on loan and then actually made it at Arsenal. People were saying, when I say made it, I mean starters, not just squad fillers. And, they were, basically like Wilshere, he went out on loan. Bellerin, he went out on loan and then became a starter at Arsenal. ESR, you could say, but like even he's kind of like on the bubble a little bit. People were saying Nketiah, and Nketiah is definitely not a starter at Arsenal, right? Szczesny fits that description as well. Let me see, there were some other examples too. Just kind of nailing home like the like it's very hard to make it at Arsenal. And as Arsenal gets better, you will see more and more of these types of things happening, right? ESR, Bellerin, Wilshere, Coquelin, Szczesny, and Kieran Gibbs. That's a very small sample size of players that went out on a loan and came back to Arsenal and had any sort of significant role or started or whatever. And so I do think that anybody that's trying to make it seem as though this Charlie Patino situation is some grave injustice to Charlie Patino is being disingenuous, like really and truly. And I understand that like he's a talented kid and it's always like fear of missing out, right? You have that FOMO of like, what if he is the next? What if he is the next? What if he is the next? When you look at the probability and the percentages of players that actually do make it, you can say that like it's unlikely that he does become that one guy. It is unlikely, but because if that were the case, I do think that we would have seen more against Nottingham Forest. We would have seen more like if he was actually the player that people are saying that he is, like a Gnabry or something like that, then against Blackpool, like when he was at Blackpool, I do think that people would have been saying that, you know what I mean? But in regards to like the Vieira Lakanga things and like, oh my gosh, like keeping those two players and buying them and not giving Charlie Patino a chance is like this grave injustice or something like that, or some criminal act, right? Even if Arsenal have not invested well, so let's say that you don't think Lakanga or Vieira are any good, that doesn't mean that Charlie Patino is the answer, And I think that we often have this thing where it's like we find something where we can use it as a stick to beat the club with, and like it never really works out, right? Even with Willock, I've seen that this lately is that because Willock is just now, like it really is like just now, maybe in the last couple of months, started to do well for Newcastle, that we should have kept him in the team. And Arteta, all it took was another loan and all this kind of stuff. Rewriting history on Joe Willock. First of all, nobody was sad that he left. Like, I'm sorry. Like, I've done many a stream. I've been on Twitter many a times. Like, there was not very many out there that were saying that Joe Willock was the answer to our midfield problems. There just weren't, So if you're saying it now, you're lying. Like, nobody thought Willock was the answer to our troubles, right? And when he left, even after he had that like purple patch, like nobody really gave a shit. The only time that they cared was because, we had brought in Odegaard, and Odegaard didn't really step up in terms of goals. And then Willock had the goals. And so it was like, okay, well, why do we buy Odegaard? He doesn't have more goals than Willock. Another stick to beat the club over the head with, right? But then that kind of went away because we were playing well. We were top of the league. Nobody cared about Joe Willock. And now all of a sudden that we're not playing as well, Joe Willock scores a couple of goals or gets a couple of assists, and all of a sudden he's the answer. But people don't realize that, like, these players that we let go of, they would have needed to start for Arsenal in order to become the players that they are right now. And also, like, Newcastle are in a different situation than Arsenal. Newcastle are on cloud nine right now, playing with no pressure whatsoever. You know, they have this influx of money that's coming in. If you guys haven't seen, they have this new shirt sponsor or this new sponsor that's coming in, and they're going to start the Manchester City process. We can see it's coming, and they are overachieving early on in their like new process. And so Joe Willock is not in a situation where he has to try to carry or try to be like a big figure in an Arsenal midfield, where that shirt, that is a heavy ass shirt, you know? And back in 2021, had we kept Willock, that would have meant no Odegaard. Willock is our starting number 10. Xhaka is not playing. And you guys wouldn't have liked that. You guys wouldn't have liked that. So it's like these like little conversations that we continuously have about players that leave the club, and, you know, the players that we have are not good enough, and why do we not keep them, and this and that. I understand that we're frustrated, but like using Joe Willock or Lakanga Vieira, all these types of narratives to beat the club over the head with Patino doesn't really pan out when you actually go back and review the facts of it all. And, you know, my biggest thing with Patino is, you know, although I do think that it's great for players, young players, to take, you know, control of their future, if he doesn't back himself to make it at Arsenal, or if it's not important for him to make it at Arsenal, then bye. Like, you know what I mean? Like, if he doesn't back himself, like Jorginho, El Neni, and probably a couple others will be gone. Maybe not this summer, but the next one. So he could very well just do another loan, be patient, and then break through at what, 21? He's 19 now. And so if he doesn't find it important or doesn't back himself to make it at Arsenal, why would I be invested in a player like that? You know, I don't need to be invested in a player that doesn't back himself to make it at Arsenal and is not desperate to get back here. So again, I don't understand why Arsenal fans are so mad. Like, I really don't. Elite clubs over the last couple, like elite clubs that we know of, you know, over the last 10 years, let's say, have had academy graduates, you know, that they've had to watch do well at other places. They just had, it's how it goes, right? You have this great team that you've bought, and then you have some academy players that just don't make it, not because they're not good at, not because they're not good, but because there's no space, there's no pathway, and because, quite frankly, you don't need them, right? And so they have to watch those players do well in other places. And it just happens. Like, it happens all the time. But the key is to make sure that those talented players that leave are profitable, you know, for the club, and that you don't actually miss them in the squad that you have. And that's Arsenal's issue right now, is that we have not gotten to the place where those talented players have become profitable for us. So inserting buyback clauses and sell-on clauses and things like that, that needs to be like something that's like a common practice moving forward. And we can't have players in those positions that are not really moving us forward, or are not elite level world-class players, right? And so I think that's the key for Arsenal now, is like, nobody will talk about Patino and Guendouzi and Willock and these guys if the guys that are in those positions right now, there's nothing better than them, you know? So we can look at it and say, like, well, I may like Patino, but like, he's not better than Rice. I may like Patino, but he's not better than Caicedo. I might like Patino, but he's not better than blank. And right now, I just think that there's a little bit of like maybe an unsettling, or a little bit of like a feeling of like, well, I don't want to let these talented players go, because I'm afraid maybe the club won't do the right thing in the summer and bring in players that will take us to that next level. And some of that, you know, maybe reluctancy or lack of trust probably comes from, you know, Lakanga not working out, or Nuno not working out, or Vieira not looking like the right type of player, and all that kind of stuff. But, you know, Arsenal just have to get it right. I think if Arsenal get it right over the summer and bring in Caicedo's, Rice, you know, these types of players, Nobody will give a shit about what happens with Patino, especially if you put in a buyback clause, a sell-on clause, a clause, a Santa Claus. Nobody will care, you know? But the fact of the matter is that like this just isn't that big of a deal if Arsenal do what they're supposed to do. You know what I mean? Period. Let's see what you guys are saying. Ash says, we're trying to match Man City here. We need to be ruthless. The project is part of the project part of this era is coming to an end. I kind of agree. Monty says, I love Patino, but he's not going to take us not going to take us that far, maybe, or to that next level. Matt says, sell Patino if things can't be worked out, but with a buyback clause for sure. Mark says Caicedo and Rice will join big clubs. Well, then potentially they'll join Arsenal because Arsenal is a big club. Saida says, you can't say you want us to compete and then become attached to academy players that aren't ready to step in. I do think Arsenal need to add certain clauses, though, when selling academy players on. I agree with that. I think it's about the business aspect of things. I don't really view, some of these guys that are, not going to make it at Arsenal as like this big thing, as long as when it comes down to it, when, he is sold to, let's say they sell him to some championship club or something like that, or a lower level Premier League club, and then he inevitably ends up at one of our rivals in like 4 years or something like that, that we get some of that, that's just all I care about. You know what I mean? It just is what it is. Cincinnati says never rated him that, to be honest, whether you rated him or not, like it's one of those things where, I thought that he looked like a nice player, especially like in comps when he was playing with the academy, and some of the times like in the championship when he was playing with Blackpool. Like, again, I didn't watch him a lot, but when I did like kind of peek in or like look at a comp or there, he looked good. But Arsenal need to just like blow that midfield up, like really, and like they really do. And I don't think Patino being there or not would make a huge difference really next season. We need to be focused on replacing the starters. I think, somebody put out a post today that was like, who are the guaranteed starters for next season? And I'll be like, although there was like a lot of like, there was differences in those opinions, like just variations slightly, but almost everybody said the same thing, that those two midfield positions that like Odegaard does not occupy are not guaranteed, should not be guaranteed, have to be upgraded upon. And I think if Arsenal do that and Charlie Patino is let go, nobody will care. I really do feel that way. Yo-Yo says, would be sickening and funny to see the likes of Bruno G and Willock possibly tearing apart our midfield in the game coming up. I don't even know if it's just about like the midfield per se. I just think it's just like the team in general. I think the collective, if we were playing the way that we were playing at the beginning of the season, when the sun was shining and nobody was stressed out about the title and all that kind of stuff, then I'd back us to go to St. James and play well, even with Granit Xhaka and Thomas Partey in our midfield. But the way that we're playing right now, psychologically, I just see us getting absolutely destroyed. And I don't know if it's just because like Bruno G and Willock are so much better than our players. I think mentally they have vacated the premises, and that will be the biggest difference between the teams. It's not the quality of the players. It's going to be who's mentally like Newcastle are playing with freedom, and you can tell that they're having a good time. They had their little, in the middle of the season, their little bumpy time, like they had that, and then now they're finishing the season on a high, where once again Arsenal are finishing their season on a low and are not going to be able to. I don't see us personally getting out of this mindset until we play against Nottingham Forest or Wolves at the end of the season. They just don't. Like Arteta is talking in that press conference, and he's looking at us, telling us that the players are up for it, and they're not satisfied with the way that the season is ending. I think they're very satisfied. They've clinched Champions League, and they're probably on the beach right now. That's a conversation for another day. Jordan Hill says, I would say it's a bit dismissive to say they are overachieving. They're third for a reason. They have good players. They're overachieving. Who? I would say it's a bit dismissive to say they're overachieving. They're third for a reason. Maybe you're talking about somebody else. I don't know. I don't remember that part of the conversation. But yeah, because I've said a lot. Let's see what you guys are saying. Monty says we need Champions League level players, not more young youth players. It's about competing at the highest level. I really do think that people don't remember how things kind of unfolded. The reason why Emil Smith Rowe, Saka, and Martinelli are so prominent on our squad now is because Unai Emery was desperate because he couldn't get anything from the senior players that were in the team. And so, and Arteta kind of took that on as well. He couldn't get much from the senior players, and so not that they're not good enough, but there was a spot available for players that would not have been available otherwise. Do you know what I mean? And so if Arsenal are recruiting properly, I don't see there being those gaps in the squad necessarily where players are going to be popping through unless they are our supreme talent. Like an Ashley Cole, like a Wilshire, like players like that, like Saka, that come through and can go straight into the first team. It is rare that players go out on loan and come back and play significant roles in the team if you're recruiting properly. Usually, if the club loans them out, it's for a reason, So I don't see why, Patino is like, the straw that's breaking the camel's back. I do think people need to like be for real. Um, let's see. Morgan says we've already wasted money on players like Fabio, Lakanga, and Kivior, etc. Maybe not. I'm very kind of like not. I think we have kind of gaslit ourselves into thinking that the players that we've bought have no quality, and because they don't play well all the time. And quite frankly, I think it's just squad mismanagement, to be honest. Like, the players, no matter who it is that come off of our bench, don't look like they can offer much on a consistent basis. And I think it's a confidence issue. I think it's a lack of consistent minutes issue. And I don't think that Vieira, Lakanga, Tamiyasu, Tierney, Kivior, Jorginho, these guys are not good players. I think that we don't, like, beyond the starting 11, everybody else that's kind of in the shadows doesn't necessarily get enough love and attention so that they can actually perform consistently. I'm very apprehensive about this idea that like players that were quality before they came to Arsenal just are like the worst players in the world once they get here, especially without like a full season of actually being able to see them. So yeah, to me, it's more mismanagement of the squad. A good example of that would be, do you guys actually believe that Brighton have significantly better players than Arsenal? I don't think so. But Brighton are able to take out 4 or 5 starters and still play the exact same. 4 or 5 starters come out the team, the players that fill in for them, players like, Welbeck, who else came into that team on that day? Billy Gilmore, players like that came into that team and still played exactly the same. I think that we're gaslighting ourselves into thinking that these players aren't very good. They may not be world class, but they're definitely better than what they show out there on a daily basis, or when they actually get a chance to play. They don't play that much. They don't play that much. It's very difficult, like, to come in, know that this is really a conversation for another day, but like, to come in, no matter how well you play, you're never going to start, and knowing that this is like the only chance you're going to get to show yourself, and you may be on the bench for the next 4 or 5 weeks without seeing any game time. I'm not sure how a player is supposed to play well under those types of circumstances. You know, um, not even just like the first time that Kivior got a chance to play, he was playing in a European match with Saliba, with Vieira, Jorginho, and Xhaka in front of him. And he had never played for Arsenal before. So he didn't even get like home comforts or anything like that. He had to play in a European match where the team was just shit, And that was the first time we ever saw him. And then the next time we got a chance to play in Europe, he didn't play, And then the next time we saw him was in 10 minutes against Liverpool. You know, I don't know how we're supposed to make a decision on whether or not Kivior is good enough or not by those minutes. You know, Ash says, how can we say we've wasted money on Kivior? He played 70 minutes. Fabio Vieira's played 455 minutes, you know, in the Premier League. You know, and quite frankly, everybody that played in the group stages of the Europa League played terribly. We went through this when it happened. You know, when we were playing in the Europa League group stages, I was very concerned about the fact that it looked very difficult for us to win those games. We weren't winning them very easily. You know, the only team that I thought we beat pretty convincingly was maybe like Zurich. You know, but even like Tierney and Tomiyasu didn't look good. And we know that those are quality players. So the fact that everybody looks bad in the Europa League team, for me, should show people that like those are not really that great of minutes, because you're not playing with players that are, everybody's just playing the same shit. Like, it's crazy. Like, I think it's mismanagement, but yeah. Lucas says, what are we doing? Clearly doesn't work. Signing those prospect as squad players, I mean. Maybe, but even when you don't sign prospects, I mean, Jorginho's not a prospect. Like, he's not a prospect. So, you know, and the first couple of times that he played well. Like when he played against Aston Villa and he played against Leicester, he was fine. He was good. And then ever since then, he's looked dog, you know? So it's like, what is that? You know, so Jorginho's not, you know, really like a prospect. I think it doesn't matter who it is, you guys. It wasn't even Vieira and Kivior last season. It was Ainsley Maitland-Niles. It was Lokonga. It was those guys, Chambers, you know, those guys who are average players all looked bad coming off of our bench. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's the same problem as last season. The players are just different. So how are we not looking at it as like a systematic club issue rather than a quality player issue? I am sorry. Players that we bought, they're not shit. Like, they're not. Kivior played in the World Cup for Poland. He's not shit. I'm sorry. Fabio Vieira, before he signed for us, one of the biggest prospects in Portugal, I'm sorry. I saw him play in the Champions League and in the Europa League. He's not shit. You know, so these are not crap players. They're not. There's a mismanagement of the gray areas of the squad. You know, they need more minutes. They need to be played with other good players, and they need confidence. And quite frankly, if you know you're never going to get a chance to start, no matter how well you're going to play, what is the point of playing? You know, the only players that play hard no matter what, knowing that they're never going to start, are Elneny and Holding. And think about how bad those players are. No offense to them. But quality players, they want to know if they start and they play well, that there's a chance that in the next game they can start. You know? There it is, you know? Gus says, Jess, I don't know what you see in Fabio Vieira, but he's not good enough. What I see is the fact that I've actually seen him play well for Arsenal in 2 games in the Premier League, and the fact that everybody plays poorly in the Europa League, for me, makes it see it's not a Fabio Vieira thing. Tierney looks shit in the Europa League. Tomiyasu looks shit in Europa League. Jorginho looks shit in Europa League. Everybody looks shit in Europa League. Martinelli didn't look good either. So I could just throw those games in the bin. Now, in regards to the Premier League, he's only played 450 minutes in the Premier League. That is not a big enough sample size for me to say that that player is poor, especially when I've seen him play well against Wolves and well against Brentford. But guess what? In those games, we were also playing well. You know, I've never seen a game where everybody was playing well, but Fabio Vieira was the bad one, you know? So for me, it's like, I'm not about to scapegoat, you know, Fabio Vieira into being like the reason why we can't win games, or you know, it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to me. Monty says, to be honest, I think we need to actually start selling these players before we get in the position we are. We can't sell none like usual, and we end up with no fee and a rundown contract situation. Rallyon, thank you so much for your super chat. Says, if I look at Spanish and Italian leagues, I see that Barcelona and Napoli perform similar to Arsenal lately, only that we have Man City on our back. I've seen that as well, but at the same time, it's just like, as much as I recognize that 100%, like if we were in a different league, or if Manchester City didn't exist, potentially we would have secured the league already. but that's just not the world that we live in. And so, although like I can rationalize not winning the league in that way and say like we're just unlucky that we have a team that's basically backed by a nation state that is dealing, they can operate in different ways that we can't actually compete with, blah blah blah. For me, that doesn't really explain why we couldn't beat West Ham or Southampton, and I think if you beat those two teams and you have those additional 4 points, you don't go into the Man City game feeling like you have to win it. So you're more relaxed. You can go into the next couple of games feeling like you have a chance. So I hear that. We do have to be damn near perfect, and we had an opportunity to. And I don't really think that like, that's just how it should have happened. You know what I mean? Let's see. Yo-Yo says, are you criticizing Arteta's man management? Oh my. Of course I am. But at the same time, like I criticized it at the end of last season as well. Like I'll always call it like how I see it. And I'm never like the problem is like we talked about this the other day. I'm not a part of High Standards FC or Top Gooners, like, and that's why nobody agrees with what I'm saying, because they feel like I flip flop all the time. But that's because the answer is usually somewhere in the middle. Things are more nuanced. They deserve more, honesty, and the conversation is often not as black and white as people think it is. Arteta's done really well this season, and we've improved the squad. Our team has played a lot better. We've been able to accrue more points. We've been more consistent, but I still see similar issues and patterns that I saw last season, where the bench is basically unusable. And that doesn't make sense to me. I don't think it makes sense to have quality players on your bench that don't look like they can give you any sort of anything at any point. I think that that's weird to me. I think you should be able to swap out 2 or 3 of your players and still be able to maintain a certain level of consistency. I think having 3 or 4 games prior to a really important game and collapsing is a pattern that we've seen. Before we played against Spurs, after the international break, last season, we collapsed against Crystal Palace, Southampton, and Brighton. 3 games that we could have won with the team that we had. I know we had injuries, but we could have won with the team that we had. And then when we got up against Spurs and Newcastle, we just completely collapsed. And then people were like, well, that's just what would have happened anyway. But what about those games prior? What's going on in those boys' heads 3 games before that important game where they can't perform? What happens right after that March international break where we can't perform? It's either the international break is the issue, or it's that we see a really important game in the horizon, we don't feel confident, and we collapse. Because there's no reason why we shouldn't have. I can see Anfield, but West Ham and Southampton just don't make sense. And all I can really think is that they were thinking too far ahead to that Man City game and then bottled the games prior to. To me, that's management. That's man management. That's getting your team in the right mind frame to actually perform in games, to take it one game at a time, to slow their heart rate down. Like, it's just, so Arteta being 3 years into his managerial career is probably not perfect. And so the idea that he should be without any sort of criticism doesn't really fly. And next season, there's going to be a much bigger expectation of this group, and collapsing at the end of another season for me that it won't make sense, because we've already done it twice. But of course, like, the management of those players on the bench for me is something that's like a big bugbear for me, because Arsenal fans, then everybody on the bench is crap, and they're not. Like, we know that they're not. And I think that's just an easy cop to be like upset about something. The players are just shit. We didn't recruit well. They're not. Like, I'm sorry. They're just not. O'Malley says, agreed, Jess. Arteta is going to have to learn to trust the squad. It's the biggest weakness at the moment in time. And the interesting thing about that is that, I was having this conversation with somebody else, and they were, saying that, Arteta doesn't trust the players, and, we need better players and this and that. And I was like, but these are his players. At this point, you bought Lukanga, you bought Vieira, you bought Trossard, you bought Jorginho, ESR, you re-signed, you re-signed El Neni, you re-signed Holding. This is all of his team now. This is his group. And so when we give him so much credit for his talent ID for the players that work out, I also have to remind myself that the players that are on the bench that are not working out are also players that he signed. And if he doesn't trust them, then that's on then what who are we blaming? Like, doesn't make sense. He should know how to use and trust the players that he bought or re-signed. Do you know what I mean? And so this whole idea that he needs like 6 or 7 more players to like work with doesn't really make sense to me. He needs to change his management style. He can't just run the same 12, 13 players into the ground and then expect quality players to just come in, know that no matter what they'll never start, but also know that this is like their one chance to perform. It doesn't make sense to me. I'm not saying that like I think Fabio Vieira is going to be fine as long as he gets more consistent game time. But at the same time, when you give young players consistent game time, they fuck up. And Arsenal fans don't like that either. And so, I think if you want Kivior and you want Vieira to play significant, minutes and have confidence next season, you also have to take the rough with the smooth and realize that they're going to make mistakes, but those mistakes ultimately will be how they become good players, for Arsenal. But people don't want that. They want, these young players to come in, not make any mistakes, be perfect, and then if they're not, then they don't want to ever see them again. They want them out the team. It's hard. It's a difficult balance. And maybe that was Arteta's issue, was he didn't really feel like he could give them the run of games that they probably deserved in order to become useful squad members. But at some point you have to trust your coaching enough where you feel like you can handle having 1 or 2 starters out the team and still get results. That's the next step. Ash says Arteta's biggest room for improvement is squad management. It should get better next season with a better squad. It has to. It has to. John Donut says, hey, Jess, hello to you as well. There's 218 of you guys in here. Make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel. Lucas says, so if Arteta is not able to rotate and keep players engaged, then we need to move on from that strategy and sign Trossard, Rice level players move on to a new coach. Yeah, I mean, you can think of it that way, where it's like, then we shouldn't sign, Vieira and Kivior type players. Don't sign young players, just sign players that are ready to go. But the thing is it doesn't matter what kind of players we have on the bench. It really doesn't. He doesn't trust the bench, period, ever. If you're not playing, you're out in the cold, basically, like, period, whoever you are. And the biggest example of that to me is Jorginho. Like, Jorginho is somebody that Arteta raved about, really liked, has won things before, is not a kid, and he still doesn't trust him to play. And yeah, you're probably like, well, what games could he have played? I mean, he could have played instead of Fabio Vieira but you know what I mean? He played him, and then he didn't play the more experienced player. He could have played him instead of Xhaka in a double pivot, in these games where we didn't have as much cover, but he didn't do it, so it's an interesting one. But I just think Arteta just needs to get to the point where he needs, I don't know, it's just like, can we not, because our players run out of, I don't even know if it's just that they're tired or not. I think it's more mental fatigue than anything. But, if they keep running out of steam and just kind of hitting a wall 5 games before the season ends, like, maybe they shouldn't have played all those games. There were games where I still feel like we would have easily won, even if Vieira was in the team, when we were playing better, just like when we had Nketiah in the team. You can carry some of these guys and get them up to speed, but we never did. We basically rendered Vieira, Kivior, these guys useless because they just didn't get any playing time. Yo-Yo says, these critiques of Arteta reoccur every season despite the squad improving. Fair enough. To me, it's a red flag. That, like, here's the thing. It's like, I like Arteta, and I think he's done a really good job, and I want him to get another season. Obviously, like, this is not Arteta out. This is the hardest thing, is critiquing the manager at all, and then people not taking it as like this, Arteta out, you hate him. I don't. But I love Arsenal more than I love Arteta, right? And so from my perspective, it's just like, next season, I don't think people are going to be as open to the idea that, like, you can't rotate your squad at all. That because we're going to buy more players, and then if he doesn't trust the players on the bench again, are we just going to say that those players are crap? Like, I don't actually believe that the players that are on the bench are crap. I think that he's having a hard time. Maybe he doesn't trust those players to get the results, and that's just not something that I feel like a good manager has as a quality, is the not being able to rotate. One of Pep's biggest strengths is knowing when to drop people, when to bring other people into the team. He gives players runs of games. And I get that he's playing with different levels of players, but all managers do it. All good managers do it regardless. They'll bring somebody into the team that, give them 3 or 4 games to play, and then somebody else will come in, and with Arsenal, it's like you only come in if there's an injury. So any sort of change is injury enforced, most likely. And you play up until that starter comes back, regardless to how well you've played in the meantime. And anybody who comes in, they know they're never going to start. And that's just not how you build a squad that's going to be fairly competitive. So let's see. Boy says Partey overplayed at Atleti. What, the stats are a lie. Partey didn't really play that much, to be honest, at Atleti. I think people have already pointed that out, that he was managed he played a lot of bigger games, but he didn't play every single game. And so I don't know if that was an oversight on Arsenal's point, but he doesn't look like he's somebody that can play every game, which is a problem, I think. Let's see. Sonny says, I think this just shows that Arteta has not rotated enough this season. He will learn from this, but also hard to drop first 11 players when they're continually winning. But here's the thing, Sonny, is even though I hope that what you're saying is true, that he will learn from this, the thing about it's not dropping, it's rotating. And if the starting 11 only, can perform if they're playing every single game, that's a problem. Because what you have is a group of bench players or players that are on the bench that know they're never going to start or get consistent minutes because they're not a part of the starting 11 and it never changes. And then you have a starting 11, that feel like their spot is they're undroppable. And I don't think that that's how you create a winning culture. I just don't see how I don't see it, so it's not really dropping, it's rotating. And if that's how they see it, is I'm being dropped. And so, you don't want to drop them because you're afraid that they won't be able to perform if they're dropped, then that's weird too. That's not a winning environment. Yo-Yo says, could it be that it takes a long time for players to adjust to the system, similar to how City fans always remain patient with Grealish? It could be. Again, I'm somebody that I'm going to keep my stocks, my Vieira and Kivior stocks. I'm keeping them because I feel like people are overreacting massively to those two players, and the fact that they haven't hit the ground running necessarily in their first season at Arsenal with very limited minutes to do so. And maybe it does take time to integrate into the system and understand it, but how do you get to know the system without actually playing in it? I think at a certain point, Grealish just started playing games. And so maybe Arteta didn't feel like he could risk it this season because of what was at stake, which is Champions League. If he had missed out on Champions League this season, we'd be having a much different conversation, right? So maybe he felt like for the sake of, making sure that we met that target, he could not. Because this other thing is we've spoken about this before. One, if we did not have Champions League sewed up by now, I would be very worried that we would not get it. And the reason for that is the top 4 race doesn't look that easy right now. And we have the hardest group of games going to the end of the season, and our mentality is on the floor right now. So having that sewn up now, the best thing that could have happened was Brighton losing that game, on the same day that we lost to Man City. We qualified for Champions League, so that monkey is off our back. we might let just the whole season slide from here, but at least we got it. But I also think Arteta was unwilling to risk it. And so when we were all kind of like, why is it that in cup games we can't play stronger lineups? I do think that there was a conscious decision not to risk the league, because the league was the best opportunity that we had to qualify for Champions League. And had we had, played a stronger lineup against Man City and went further in the FA Cup or in the Carabao Cup and the Europa League, then what would the cost have been in the league? And if right now, if we hadn't won the Carabao Cup, or we weren't going that far in the Europa League, or let's say we're still in the Europa League and we weren't in the FA Cup final, but we were in a top 4 scrap, I do think people would be very disappointed. So I kind of understand like a calculated decision from Arteta's perspective not to risk the league, and that meant to start the team that he knows is going to work. But this I can't rotate at all is not going to wash next season. And so I'm leaning a little bit more towards this is who he is versus calculated decision, but we will see. But I definitely hear, the fact that like it might take time, and you also don't want to risk games, giving people an opportunity to, get their feet underneath them. But I also think people that think that Kivior and Vieira are going somewhere they have to get over it. Like Vieira and Kivior, I've never heard Arteta speak so highly about players in the past. And so I think those guys are going to play big roles for Arsenal moving forward, but they need the game time to do it. Scott says, what type of players do you need to recruit to get over the hump? MCFC have Mahrez, Gundogan, etc., while LFC had Milner, Mane, Rabo, etc., scrappers. I don't even know if it's about players that get you over the hump. Like, the reality is that I always thought Man City would catch us up to a certain degree. Not like this, but I think they were always going to catch us up. The points were always going to, condense a little bit more. It was always going to get closer. But you didn't need any sort of different types of players, really, in my opinion, to beat West Ham or Southampton, which those two games were the games that really sealed our fate. So I don't even know if it's about players that get you over the hump per se, because we have the players to do it. But in terms of like, if we're talking about winning big things and, winning Champions Leagues, winning Premier Leagues, winning trophies, the one thing that I will say that Arsenal do lack, and maybe this is more of the conversation versus types of players versus personalities, but we lack experience. We lack leaders, 100%. We don't have leaders in this team. We've learned that. And so maybe that's more what it is, because, Liverpool have been able to win things without necessarily having the same level of bench that Man City has, but they also have players with huge personality and leaders throughout their team. And maybe that's the difference, is Arsenal don't have the experience and they don't have the leaders. And I would say like people had like, Partey and Xhaka and Jesus and Zinchenko in the list of leaders. And even I, to a certain extent, felt like, okay, well, those are the senior players. They've been there and done it before. Like, they should have the experience. But when it really comes down to it, like, we really don't. And the players that have been the most, like, carrying us and had the most, I think, confidence and conviction in difficult moments have actually still been the younger players. And I think that's more of the issue, potentially. Than anything. Terrence Tibbs says Arteta throwing Trossard, the big game player, to the side is what cost us the title. Nobody was saying that when Jesus was scoring them goals, though. To me, that's very hindsight too. Is like when Jesus was scoring, goals, when he scored those goals he scored the goal at Anfield. Nobody was saying that Trossard needed to be in this team. I think we were all kind of like, oh, gutted for him, like wish he could have played this game. But ultimately, like, nobody was saying that. Like, the only game that I remember people saying that Trossard had to start was against Manchester City. And by the time we played Manchester City, the title was gone. What cost us the league was our mentality against Liverpool, West Ham, and Southampton. That's what cost us. We scored enough goals, so Like people that are like, we didn't score enough goals. You shouldn't have to score 4 goals against Southampton to beat them. You shouldn't have to score 3 goals against West Ham to beat them. They're all crap. 2 goals at Anfield should be enough. What happened was that midfield totally capitulated and the back line also capitulated. To me, that was more of the issue than Trossard not being in the game. Like nobody really was talking about Trossard until after the Man City game. So yeah. Boy says, I'll tell you what, if Arteta and friends sell Patino and Balogun, then expect a league win next season, nothing less. So here's the thing, going back to the Patino, conversation, is that like, I don't really care if Balogun or Patino go. Like, of course, I'd love for them to stay. But if their prerogative is to go out there and start games at some other club and get consistent minutes, I don't believe that should be at Arsenal. I wouldn't feel comfortable with Arsenal not bringing in a striker or not bringing in a midfield to give those positions to Balogun or Patino. So that's where we're at. They don't want to loan. They don't want to sit on our bench. It is what it is. If they want to go, then they should go. The problem is it should be, something where we make a good amount of money for them. So like Balogun should not be going for anything lower than 30 million, I think. And I don't know how much Patino costs, but there should be buyback clauses, sell-on clauses, all that kind of stuff, right? So whatever. But the main thing is you won't miss those players if you recruit properly, and Arsenal are winning the things that they should be winning. Chelsea fans have not cared at all about the academy players that they've let go until lately because the recruitment has been terrible. And so the players that they're watching do well at other clubs, they feel like potentially should be in the team that they have right now. But in the past, they never cared about selling their academy kids because the team that they had was winning trophies. And I think that's the issue with Arsenal is right now we're not necessarily winning anything. We're not necessarily 100% on the group that we have. And so we're so afraid to miss out on these young kids that probably are not going to make it at Arsenal anyway, based on statistics, because we went over that earlier. The likelihood of going out on loan and then making it at Arsenal is very slim. It's not really like a thing, So Arsenal need to make sure that they fill those positions correctly. And I think the main thing for Arsenal is midfield. And what I'm seeing online basically is Arsenal want to invest, but we don't know if it's going to be 1 or 2 midfielders. It could be 1, could be 2. But quite frankly, if they recruit anything less than 2, they're unserious, in my opinion. Like, we have needed this midfield revamp for a very long time. We've done very well with Partey and Xhaka, but between Partey's unavailability and Xhaka's lack of he's a square peg in a round hole. He's doing well in a position that doesn't necessarily suit him. Those two positions have got to be upgraded massively. And so before, or maybe a couple of days ago, Ornstein had come out with a report saying that, or actually right before the Man City game, I think, he said that Arsenal want for the 6th position, Rice or Caicedo, and for the 8th position, Mohamed Kudus or Mason Mount. And also, this is not coming from Ornstein, but there are reports that Arsenal are open to listening to offers for Granit Xhaka, which is a little bit of a U-turn from what we were hearing over the last couple of months about Arsenal potentially giving Xhaka a new deal. My feelings on this are that Arsenal definitely need 2 midfielders, regardless. Like, whoever the midfielders are, they need 2, and they do need a 6, and they need an 8. And I don't think it's going to be Rice and Caicedo. It's going to be Rice or Caicedo, and then some sort of 8 that's going to play the position that Xhaka is playing currently. But we have a lot of midfielders, but not a lot of midfielders that work for us. We have Emile Smith-Rowe, you have Vieira, you have Xhaka, you have Partey, you have El Neni still hanging around, you have Jorginho, you have to do something with Lokonga as well. That's a lot of additional players that don't necessarily represent, I think, what we need to move forward. So somebody does have to go. I don't see a scenario where you bring in Caicedo and Mount or Kudus and Rice and you just keep everybody. So somebody's going to go. I would be shocked if that was Granit Xhaka based on the past, over the last 4 years. Like, Xhaka has been Arteta's guy. But if we were to listen to offers for Granit Xhaka and Granit Xhaka were to leave Arsenal Football Club, deep down, I would feel like we're moving in the right direction. And this may sound harsh, but I don't think we should be that loyal to somebody who doesn't necessarily take us to the next level, doesn't necessarily play any of the positions that we have in midfield. Right now, we play with 1-6 and an 8 that's supposed to be getting into the final 30. Doesn't necessarily fit that. And his level of experience and leadership doesn't necessarily get us over the line now when we're in the position that we're in. So if we're meant to go to the next level, then what is the point? I would be very surprised if Granit Xhaka left, but if he did, I do feel like that would mean that we're getting to a place where we're realizing that some of these guys don't actually need to come with us. And you've spent 40 million on Vieira. That would open up opportunities for him to play more minutes. And I know Arsenal fans don't want to see that because a lot of people are done with Vieira. But quite frankly, if Xhaka is still here and you buy another 8, Emile Smith-Rowe and Vieira are not going to get that much playing time. And so somebody has to kind of move away in order to open up opportunities for players that we've invested in that haven't been here long enough. You know, I think it would be maybe a good thing to listen to offers for Granit Xhaka and not renew him. But I'd be very, very surprised if that happened because Arteta's very loyal to the group that has gotten him here. But I don't think he should be that loyal to some of these guys because they're not taking us to the next level. Like, for real, for real. Boy says Lakanga is so trash. Can't believe we signed him and sold Willock. Did you want Willock to stay? Because in 2021, nobody wanted Willock to stay. And in 2021, when Willock was playing for us, everybody talked about him as bad as they talked about Lakanga. So, yeah, no. Gus says, Jess, Moises Caicedo, or Rice. I'll take either. My personal preference would be Rice, but I would take either. Yo-Yo says, I take Mount Caicedo personally. Don't love it, but I take it. Let's see. Mark. Oh, yeah, you're just trolling. Gary says, half of these midfielders you've named are not good enough for Arsenal. Well, those are the guys that we have. And so, you know, there has to be some decisions made, and we're going to be in Champions League. And quite frankly, like, you know, we bought Jorginho, we have El Neni still on the books. You know, Granit Xhaka is somebody that's just, you know, he doesn't really fit either of the positions, but he's being shoehorned in. And then you have a young player that you spent a lot of money on that hasn't gotten much playing time. So decisions do need to be made. For sure. Jaden says Partey is gutless, sell and replace with 2 players. Xhaka is a gem and should be second choice, an amazing locker room fella, 3 midfielders. Somebody has to go. So whether it's Partey, Xhaka, or both, I don't really see, you know, El Neni, Jorginho, they're all 29, 30, 31 years old. None of them are taking us to the next level. And so I would say like at least 2 of them got to go, you know, so whichever one's pick. But the last players that I'd probably be looking at are Vieira and ESR because they're young, talented players that haven't had an opportunity. And the thing is like we know what the ceiling and we know how far those players can take us. Jorginho, El Neni, Partey, and Xhaka, we know how far they're going to take us. But the younger players, I do think deserve a little bit more time, you know, and those are the players that I'd be more keen to keep and then look at the other ones and say, okay, which ones are you guys are going, you know, because, you know, like, where are you guys going to take us? You've taken us as far as you can. Leonard says, so you are saying you need to buy midfielders you already have. Why don't you make yours better instead? I don't know what that means. So you're saying you need to buy midfielders you already have. Why don't you make yours better instead? Well, at a certain point, a player is going to get as good as they can get, you know? So again, I don't think like Xhaka's not going to, Arteta has done as good as he can with Granit Xhaka. So Arteta has improved Partey and Granit Xhaka. Both of them have become so much better since they've been at Arsenal. So, but it also goes to a certain level. Like Like Granit Xhaka and Thomas Partey are very good players, but are they world class consistently? Are they going to take us into Champions League? They're going to help us win the league? No, so at a certain point, you do have to replace players, and they're both 30. So not quite sure what you're getting at here, but Arteta has genuinely improved the two of them, but that's as good as they're going to get. So either they need to become squad players or they need to be moved on. That's it. P Trim says, Jess, who are the leaders we are recruiting? Where are they? The leaders we need? Well, I mean, it's hard because, leaders are made. You can buy leaders as well. But it's hard because I do think that, some people are like, well, what would you rather have? A player that's been in a winning side or a player that's been in a losing side but has like led them, and I think that that's the reluctancy around Rice is they're like, well, he's in a bad team, but he's the captain. So like, what are we getting from that? But I think you could see even when we play against West Ham, when we played against them the other day, that he was actually more of a leader than anybody else on our pitch, so I think from my perspective, you can see that Rice is a leader, and that's why I'd actually prefer him over Caicedo, because in midfield, we do lack a bit of personality when the shit gets tough. When the shit hits the fan, we don't have the personalities to get us over the line. And the midfield is kind of like the hub, like it is like the heartbeat of the team. And so, yeah, you can have leaders at the back. Like you obviously need leaders at the back, but I think most teams either their captain is in the back or their captain is in the midfield. And right now, like Odegaard is kind of the captain, but he needs help. He needs more than that. And Partey and Xhaka go missing in big games. So we need more there. So yeah, I would go with Rice. Blaze says, just be careful when you talk about Xhaka, could be sold this summer because some Arsenal fans are so emotional and attached to players. I'm emotional to Arsenal, not the players. So whoever's going to make us better is the player that I want there. I love some players. I really do like there. I love this group, but if there is a player that I like is going to take us to the next level, I want them in the team. Do you know what I mean? And so with Xhaka, it's just like he's done so well this season, and his improvement is part of the reason why we've been so good. But the loyalty, I do sometimes feel like could be a blind spot for a manager, because I feel like you could get into Jurgen Klopp territory very quickly. Like when he built his team initially, he was very loyal to like that whole group. But I almost feel like his loyalty to some of them is the reason why they're falling behind now. And of course, Liverpool will recruit and get back, to, a better level and all that kind of stuff. But his reliance and loyalty to the likes of Milner and Henderson and, even Van Dijk to a certain extent, I do think is a little bit of a blind spot, and I see a lot of that in Arteta, and I see a lot of arson in Arteta as well. Like sometimes trusting players is a good thing, and sometimes you have to know when to not trust them anymore. And I think Xhaka, like Holding, El Neni, they've taken us as far as they can take us. They've done a good job. They deserve their flowers for what they've done, but I don't necessarily feel like they deserve a ticket to the next part, you know? Um, but if Arteta has that arson gene, which it feels like he does, then we're going to have a lot of these guys kind of lurking around for way longer than they should, playing important games when they shouldn't. And it's going to be painful, you know? I'm not really that sentimental about, once you're not good enough, like I'm kind of like, because I want Arsenal to be where they're supposed to be, and not to be like harsh, but I don't think anybody can really tell me like that we give me a good reason why Holding or El Neni should still be in this team, and still be playing minutes, besides the fact that they're nice guys, and that's not good enough. Saida says, I prefer Caicedo over Rice, but I do think Rice would be a better signing as he can play 6, 8, and as a center back. I agree. Let's see. Alumide says, Mark Gahey to Arsenal. We'll talk about that in a second as well. Yo-Yo says, if the reports are true that City are in for the likes of Madison and Jude, then we are not bridging the gap with another season of Xhaka and Partey. And that's the reality is like, they're good players. They're very good players, but we need better than that. And Arsenal over the years, when we were in our best periods, like we've always had world-class midfielders, always. That's just what we've had, you know, Petit, Vieira, Gilberto, Fabregas. Like we've had these world-class guys in our midfield. And as the time has gone past, like we've had some good ones, some okay ones, you know, but it's not enough. Like midfield, you have to have world-class players in there that are going to drag you over the line. And so the two of them need to be moved on or replaced in the starting 11. Gary Joseph says Declan Rice is a leader. I agree. Mal says, Jess, would you take Mane? I don't think he's happy at Bayern. No, I wouldn't. He looks like he's fallen off of a physical cliff. And so going from the Premier League to the Bundesliga and then coming back might be a little bit too hard for him. So I would say a hard pass on that one. John Donut says Rice at Arsenal would be a big boost. It feels like a good fit. You know what I mean? But we have to see if Arsenal have the, you know, ability to make a big signing because that's going to cost a lot of money. West Ham are not going to give him away cheaply, and we don't have any excuses because Champions League, you know, money, you guys said you would. And so I think Arsenal fans, as good as KSC has done and as much as we recognize the improvement, you can never take your foot off of the neck of the owners because as soon as you start to just kind of go with the flow and just accept anything, they start to, what you guys would say, take the piss, right? And so I think we have to make sure that we keep the standards up and let them know, like, you're not just going to collect this Champions League money and not reinvest it back into this team. You know, we need you. Like, if they don't get Rice or Caicedo, we should be on them for sure. You know, that's what was promised. You know, Yo-Yo says Klopp didn't build that Liverpool team. It was Edwards. Fair enough. Bowman says, all this Partey slander is ridiculous. Is it though? Like, is it? So here's the thing. If you guys have been here for multiple seasons, you guys know I've always been a Partey fan. Always thought he was top-notch player, was our most important player, had to be in the team, whatever. But at a certain point, you know, you have to recognize what a player is. He is a top player that doesn't have a great injury record, tends to be unavailable in the most important parts of the season. And when he is available, he doesn't step up to the plate. And so, you know, there are players, there's a different echelon of player that we don't have available to us that even when things are not perfect, can drag you over the line. Partey needs Xhaka as much as Xhaka needs Partey. So if either of them don't have each other, they are lost and it doesn't work. And some players are just standalone all-arounders that they make the players around them better. And right now we have a couple of players in our team that are really good players and look really good in a system that really works. But if one of those pieces are missing around them, they completely collapse. Thomas Partey is one of those. And I just feel like Arsenal deserve that next echelon of player that's just one level above, that's a leader, that is kind of like an all-arounder, that can drag a team over the line, that doesn't go missing, that is available when the season gets tough. And that is not Thomas Partey. And so it's not that he's not a top player. It's not that he's not one of our most important players. But I also feel him being one of our most important players is also an issue because he's not available enough to be your most important player and he's not reliable enough. So as somebody, if you really like Thomas Partey, you have to keep it real. You know, I'm not saying he's terrible, but if next season Thomas Partey is still our most important player, we're in trouble because he can't play every 4 days. He can't. Arteta's already said next season, these players are going to have to play every 4 days. That's the requirement. Champions League and Premier League, they're going to have to play every 4 days. And so your DM has to be able to do that. He can't do it. So it's not slander. It's just he's nothing more than a very good player that has world-class moments but is not consistent enough to actually have that title and is not a leader. Good player, not a leader, not reliable, needs upgrading. Period. Because everybody around us is going to upgrade their midfield, you know, and we already seen that Xhaka and Partey can't get us to where we need to go. You know, it's just not that deep. Like I don't know what the problem is. I don't know why we get to a point where we love a player so much that you don't even want to hear the truth. He's not available enough. You know, John says he is not available enough. Availability is underrated part of being world class. Like Jess said, even when he is available, he missed big games. Goodbye, Partey. Let's see. Simon says, always thought Partey was an on and off and best of a bad bunch. I think when he's good, he's really good, but when he's bad, he's diabolical sometimes, you know. Boy says, I know Partey is not as good as people thought he was because he's now just a DM and not a box to box. Steve says, Xhaka played well. They all have dropped off the last 4 games. Xhaka has played well. Like he has played well. I'm like, again, every single time that I've spoken about Xhaka, I've said he's played well. And him playing well is a reason why we've gotten to where we are. But sentimentality will kill you. And so saying that because Xhaka and Partey got us here, that means that we should just stick with the same midfield, then I think we're selling ourselves short. You know, I really, really do. And I expect Arsenal to go into the market and bring 2 midfielders in, period, you know, 100%. Also, Arsenal are looking at center backs, which I think is obviously should be on the agenda for the team, because I'm just so glad we're over this holding is fine gimmick. I really am. Like, no offense to him, but I was going through my mind like, what Premier League team does he start for? What Premier League team does he start for? And he don't start for none of them. He can't even. Southampton are bottom of the league, and he couldn't start above Bella Kotchap and Salisu or Larios or whatever the hell his name is. You know, and that says it all to me. He's not better than Tarkovsky, Cody, or Michael Keane. You know, he's not better than any of them. You know, that to me, that's a red flag. You know, so this is somebody who for me is not even a Premier League level standard center back, not a starting one that's starting games for Arsenal Football Club. And so he needs to be moved on and upgraded upon. And so Arsenal have been linked to Croatian center back Josip Sutalo. There's been a lot of talk about him. You know, I read the whole player profile that somebody did for him, and I thought he sounded like a really good player, 23 years old, playing in the Croatian league. My only problem is that I have 2 problems with him, is that one, he's a project, so he's not somebody that's like ready to go. And he's also a little light on the physical side. So he's a nice ball playing center back, but he really could go up a level in terms of his physicality. To me, those are 2 red flags. We already have Kivior, who in my mind is kind of like the project center back in the group. He's not necessarily right where he needs to be, but he's somebody that within the next, you know, year or so will probably be a really good player for Arsenal. We don't need 2 of those, you know, because we know Saliba is going to start most games. And so the player playing behind Saliba has kind of got to be ready to go. And so I kind of like the idea of him, but didn't really buy into it. And the other player that Arsenal are linked to is Mark Gahey from Crystal Palace. And yes, he plays on the left side, but he's right-footed. So he could play on the right side. He could also play on the left side. I think this is the type of move Arsenal should be making, quite frankly. I think, you know, Arsenal were beyond the point of having every player behind the starter be some sort of like project. There's got to be some players in the team that, you know, like a Trossard, basically. That's what Mark Gahey would be, in my opinion, is more of a Trossard, somebody who's been in the league but has enough experience and has played enough games, because Mark Gahey's played every game for Crystal Palace this season, where they're not going to be overawed by the scenario and just kind of could jump straight in. That's what Arsenal need. I really don't think we should be bringing in another project center back. If that's the case, just put Rule Walters in there and buy a right back. I don't understand what's the point of getting another project when Rule Walters is there, and they said that they want to bring him into the team. So I do think Mark Gahey would be a good option. Now, obviously, you'd have to spend a lot of money on him. It would cost you 40, 50 million. But if it took 40, 50 million not to see the collapse that we've seen at the end of this season and last season, I think it's fucking worth it. Because as we've seen, if you don't have center backs, you can't do anything around here. And it would be adding another leader to the team, and it would make sure to keep Saliba honest. Saliba's a great player, but he's young and you don't want him to get comfortable if you have another, good center back behind him that could actually step in and take his spot. Then we'd have a team that's actually really competing for spaces. So I think both of those links are okay, but if I had to pick one, I'd go for Gahey because it's a no-brainer. Arsenal don't need more projects. Like, from this point, we don't need any more projects. We have Kivior, we have Vieira. There doesn't need to be any more. You know what I mean? So the center back situation will be interesting. I've seen that some people are apprehensive about bringing in a center back because they want a right back instead. My theory or my feeling on this is that if the backup option for right side of center back is our starter and a key starter in another position, I don't want to move Ben White over. I think Ben White is slimmed down quite a bit as well, so I'm not even sure that physically he's the same center back that he was when he first came in. And so Ben White being our starting right back and a key member of the team, the last thing I want is for, if Saliba can't play, for us to have to shift a starter out of that position to cover for another. So I think the easiest way to improve the team is actually just to remove Holding and replace him. But, I want to hear your guys' thoughts on it. Ham says, I wouldn't spend that sort of money on another center back. I would. I feel like that's what the good teams do. I feel like City, they have at least 3 top center backs, and then somebody else is kind of like a project or something like that. I think we need to invest in that position and not chintz out, sorry. Jesus says, what do you think about bringing in some wing depth? Over the season, I've actually changed my mind on that. I actually think we should not get a winger and get a striker instead. So yeah, because the winger market's not that good right now, but the striker market is. And so hit while the iron is hot. You have like 5 or 6 really good options that you could bring in as a center forward. Versus the wing options are kind of like maybe Rafinha if he wants to go, spending 70 million on Diaby. Is he really worth that? And a bunch of players that are kind of wingers, but kind of not. Like I would much rather do that. Logic says Skriniar is already signed for PSG. Yeah, that's true. Margon says we need a center back, Defo, and we need a starter. We need a center back. Defo need a starting center back, maybe 2 even. Logic says midfielders and a backup center back or a right back. White can slot in at right center back. Midfielders are more important since we still have Tommy. I hear this, but, I don't even think we should be making this choice. I don't think it should just be we either get the midfielders, but if we invest in a center back, then we won't get a midfielder. Like, Arsenal need to not play around. I don't think we should be choosing between those. I understand maybe choosing between a striker or a winger. I can understand that, but like, we need a center back, and we need a good one. And just moving White over and bringing in a right back, I don't know how I really feel about that, unless it was Fresneda. Fresneda looks like he's going to Dortmund anyway, so, I don't know. I'd rather just spend the money on a really good center back and make sure that this end of this, because also Tomiyasu plays right back. So, if the point is not bringing in a right-sided center back, or not bringing another center back because Tommy can play there. Tommy's never played center back for us, but he's played both fullback positions. So technically he's the backup in both of those positions. So bring in a center back because that's actually the position that he's never played for us. Let's see. Let's see what you guys are saying. Yo-Yo says, I want a stacked squad in every department, tired of excuses being made every season when we fall short. Yeah, it's like I'm hearing all this like, well, if we get a center back, then but midfield is the priority. Midfield is the priority, but that shouldn't mean that we should not get a center back. Like that doesn't make sense, especially after the way that the season is kind of unfolded. You need another center back. Like I don't see why we would need to choose between any of that because Arsenal have Champions League money and the Kroenkes have said that they're going to spend. So I think if any position is not going to be addressed is attack. And if that's the case, then I expect a good center back to come in, not a project. Like period. So yeah, Matt says to compete for minutes with Jesus, talking about a striker. We need a striker too. Fabricio says, just thoughts on Gahey from Palace, was just talking about it. I think from a leadership standpoint, he's been a captain for them. He's played every single minute. He's ready to go. He'd be like a Trossard signing, somebody who they're not the same age, but could come straight into the team and not be overawed by the scenario. You know, he's played in this league before. And yes, it would cost like 40, 50 million to bring him in. But what would be the cost of bringing in somebody like Joseph Sitalo, who, if let's say Saliba with his injury has to miss the beginning of next season, what will be the cost of bringing that guy in who's never played in the Premier League before to start? Versus, like, do you know what I mean? Like, I feel like no more projects, period. You know, that those are my thoughts. And after, you know, I think if you have to bring anybody through, maybe it's Rule Walters. You know, they've said that they want to bring him through next season and give him a spot in the first team. If that's the case, he actually profiles very similarly to Ben White. He's more of a right back center back, in my opinion, than like a full on center back. So we need a center back, you know, and we need somebody that does not need any sort of like time to get up to speed because Kivior is already that guy. Do you know what I mean? Mashago says, I can't have Holding in the run-in again. I agree. I mean, I don't know how you can see it twice unfold and then say, well, don't bring in a center back, just move Ben White over. Like, Ben White's not even a center back anymore. I don't know if you've seen how slim he's gotten. I don't think that he's even built like a center back anymore. You know, I think we need to bring somebody in. Logic says Tommy played CB and Serie A, but yeah, right side of center back is def needed, midfield more important, but there should be no shortcuts this window with UCL next season. Exactly. I think we all kind of need to get on that same page. I think we're way too okay with accepting, you know, that, okay, well, if they're saying midfield is the priority, that's all we should expect. No, we've spent way too long out of the Champions League to let it slip out of our fingers again because we decided to let Holding play the run-in, you know, when we get into the Champions League quarterfinal. You know, hello, you know, so Southwest Gooner says, Jess, when's the last time you watched Arsenal live at the stadium? I went to Brentford at home. That's the last time I watched them, but I am planning to do all the preseason stuff. That's definitely something I want to do. Yeah, I want to go to, because we're going to play Barcelona at SoFi Stadium and we're going to play Man United at MetLife. So I definitely going to see us do that. Lynn says we need players to come in who are used to playing in the Champions League because that level is what we're going to be playing at, and we need players who are not going to crumble. Fair enough, you know, but all the players that we're talking about have never played in Champions League as well, so maybe that's a little bit of a worry. I just don't know who we're going to bring in that's played Champions League before. And what positions particularly? Do you mean midfield? Because all the midfielders that we've been linked to, like Caicedo and Rice, neither of them have played Champions League. They both played in a World Cup, but they've never played in, you know, Champions League. So they're different. They're high-level competitions, but not the same. So what position do you feel like has to have a Champions League level, like, or a experienced player in it? That's an interesting thought. I thought attacker-wise, if we were going to bring in another attacker. I'd like them to have had some Champions League experience for sure. Jaden says, so Jess, if we need a striker, does that mean you think Balogun and Eddie go, as you can't have three strikers all wanting to play? I think Balogun is gonna go. Like I don't see anything that um indicates that he would stay. Just like Patino, who I don't begrudge whatsoever. They've gotten a taste of being a first team player at a club. And so it's more important for them to explore their options and find another club where they can be a starter versus, being an Arsenal player, which is totally fine. Balogun is probably going to go. And I know people are like, well, why not just sell Eddie? Just sell Eddie. The reason why you can't just sell Eddie is, one, there has to be a market for him. And I don't know if you guys have heard anything, but Eddie has not been linked to a single club. And one of my thoughts on this is not because Eddie is not a good player, it's because of the wages that we put him on. He's on a long-term contract on very high wages. It's somewhere around the 90,000 pounds per week, 100,000 pounds per week. And the type of clubs that would be attracted to Eddie Nketiah are not going to pay a striker of his caliber that kind of money. And so when we gave him that contract, we basically said, you're going to be at the club for a while. That's what we said. So Balogun is the odd man out, in my opinion. He's the easiest person to move on. And if you have Jesus and Nketiah and Balogun all on the team, you don't have any variation anyway. They're all kind of the same-ish type of players. None of them offer any sort of like real pace. They don't have any height, no physicality. And so if we were to bring in another striker, it should not be Balogun coming back into the team. It needs to be somebody with a different set of attributes, right? And so, yeah, I think a striker could go a long way, especially because the one player that I feel like has shown quite a bit is Reiss Nelson. Reiss Nelson, for me, has not been amazing, but he's used the minutes that he's gotten quite well. And knowing that like he can play across the front three and so can Trossard makes me feel like striker is probably the position that we should be looking at, if Arsenal don't get a striker and we go into next season with Eddie and Jesus only as our striker options, I do think we'll get about halfway through the season and be like, maybe that's something that we should have done. Because if either one of them have a goal drought, like maybe like the one that Jesus has had, or something happens to Saka or something, I think will be a little bit, and especially getting into Champions League, the way that we want to play might change. And so, yeah, I think the striker is definitely the one where I'm thinking like, yeah, we need to be looking at that. It's raining. Child, when I tell you guys' weather, it's not great. It's not great. I love y'all. Your food is okay, but the weather is shit. Like it really is, you guys. Like, why is it raining? It's May. Like, what the fuck? Like, why is it raining? So yeah. Yo-Yo says the players we sign in the summer will determine the club's goals, whether we want to consolidate their position or push for top honors. Fair enough. Logic says, I can't witness another season. We got to start Xhaka and Holding against Liverpool and City. They will get mauled against Bayern and Madrid's and Barca's and UCL. I agree. I think we have like this weird thing, like Arsenal fans go too far all the time. Like, I heard people saying, well, oh my gosh, none of these teams in the Champions League look any good. The fact that we're at the top of the Premier League means that we're going to be the best in Champions League. That's not how it works. That's not how it works. Like, European football does not translate to league. It just doesn't, like, in any way. We know that like some teams are really good cup teams and their style of play really suits cup football. And then there's teams that it doesn't. It's the reason why Pep with City has, went from kind of the style that we're playing now to having more of a transitional play as well. Like they can just hit it long to Haaland. They don't have to do 15, 20 passes to get out of the back and to create a chance. Like they're very route one. He's also made his fullbacks a lot bigger. His center backs are huge, and they basically just shut the back door and just lock everybody in and just hit it to Haaland, and they can't be beat on transition like they were before. And so that's kind of like where we're at right now is We're very dominant in the league. The way that we play beats 95% of the league. It struggles against City because City do it better. It struggles against Liverpool because Liverpool are a very transition based, very quick, direct team. And that's like the antithesis of like what we're trying to do because we want to keep things small and close. And then you have Newcastle, who have ball progressors everywhere that just run through you, and they're more physical than we are. And we want to kind of pass you to death, right? So 95% of the teams we can beat. Also, we'll struggle a little bit against United because again, they want to transition on you. But in the Champions League, you're going to find more teams that want to transition that are not just going to let you sit in their half and pass them to death. You know what I mean? And so we saw that against Sporting. Against Sporting, what they did, they made it into a track meet. And so we couldn't get a lot of possession. We were kind of, from minute one, you could just tell like we were nervous. And they would just hit it into the channels, and they were hitting it in behind Zinchenko, and they were really clever with it. They make sure the game was really stretched, and we couldn't handle that. And so Arsenal's problem now is that we need to be able to combat the transition. We need to be able to compete physically. We need more athleticism, and we need a plan B up top, just in case, we can't just do what we're doing and the million passes doesn't work. We need to have more of a direct option. And so, yeah, I think that's why like players like Xhaka kind of struggle because he's not good in transition. He's a player that needs things to be really small and things to be really near him so that he doesn't have to cover big patches of grass. Holding is similar. Thomas Partey, when he's not 100% fit, he can't cover grass either. And so it's something that needs to be looked at. Also, that's why I think Kivior and Tomiyasu are so important next season because they'll offer a different option at left back in Champions League. Personally, I don't think Zinchenko is going to be a good European player for us. I think he's going to be a good league player for us. But we can chat about that another day. There's 200 of you guys in here. Make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel. Let's see. Karg says, compared to Czech's Arsenal, we are nowhere near past you to death. If we are, we could shut down the game with 2-0 lead. I hear you, but we are a possession-based team that likes to a lot of passes. We're not that direct, and it takes us, quite a bit of passes to score a goal. We're not really as direct as other teams. So even if we're not passing them to death like Man City would, we're definitely not a transitional, physical athletic team either. So yeah, let's see. Boy says at this point, it's becoming obvious that Arteta never would have developed the likes of Martinelli, Saka, and ESR if he hadn't been vetted by prior managers. I don't even know if that's that important, to be honest. Like we just already said that Unai Emery didn't use Saka and Martinelli and ESR because he was, just knew how to look at the academy and figure out what players need to come through. It was because he couldn't get anything out of the senior players because they had down tools on him. So when they down tools on him, he had to use something else. And to try to save himself, he used these young kids that he could get into their minds and he can get something out of them. So I don't even know if it's that important that Arteta doesn't bring academy players through. I think what I think is important from our Arteta perspective is not bringing players to the academy. Is if we're going to use his talent ideas that those players work in our system, and the players that he has, he can get the most out of and help us win trophies. I think the idea that Arteta's importance to Arsenal or a benchmark of whether he's good at Arsenal is how many players he brings to the academy. It's never been a benchmark before. And a lot of the reason why Arsene is used so many players from our academy is one, those players were better. And two, he had to because they didn't spend money. So he had to backfill a lot of our teams with academy players. So it's not a benchmark for Arteta to bring players through. So yeah. Let's see. Lynn says, Jess, I don't agree with how we played against Liverpool because in that game, both Fabinho and should have seen red cards in Newcastle. Dan Burns should have seen red after pulling Gabby's shirt. Yeah, I think our style of play just in general doesn't bode well against those teams because we just don't have the runners or the physicality. And despite maybe there being some inconsistencies refereeing wise in those games, I just think in general we're going to struggle against those teams if we don't find some athleticism and get over this idea that we need to be just a technical team. You know, there needs to be more balance for sure. Let's see. Weird like Liverpool fans in here. I don't know why. I don't see why they're here. Boy says, Jess, it's a vital benchmark at Arsenal. Otherwise, you were saying that we're going to match Man United and City and soon Newcastle for their raw spending. The whole point is we cover that with our academy. No, I don't think it's just we cover it with our academy. It's that we recruit better and we have like just because they spend a lot, like the false thing about City is like they it's not just so much that they can spend a lot of money, it's that they recruit well. And so even though like we're sitting here acting like, you know, they've spent so much money on everybody, you do realize that they spent 20 million on Gundogan and we spent 35 million on Granit Xhaka. You know, they spent 15 million on Akanji. You know, so every single player that they bought has not been at the top of the market. They haven't. And I haven't seen them spend what? Have they spent 100 million on a player besides, you know, Jack Grealish? No. You know, so I think it's all about recruitment and if you buy the right players. And as we've seen, like with Trossard, we spent 21 million on Trossard and he's been like a 50 million pound player. Like he just has been with his output. And so I don't think that you know, Arteta's whole thing is bringing players through our academy. It's how we recruit, how we build the squad. And if that doesn't include academy players because they're not good enough, then it doesn't include academy members because they're not good enough. I don't think Arteta's brought through any academy players, but are there any academy players that you know of right now that steps into this team and makes us better? If you can, I'll give you $100 because I don't see them. I don't. Like, I'm not looking at anybody that's went on loan. Like, Brooke Norton-Cuffy, he's went on loan. He's a good player. But why, if he, like, I don't think he's making us a much better team this season. Like, is he? Like, do you know what I mean? So I kind of understand what you're saying, but I think recruitment is more important than just bringing players through our academy. Our academy connects us to the community. It's, you know, you can have a chance to get through into the first team as an Arsenal Academy player. But in general, Arsenal, if they want to get to the next level, it has to kind of be about our recruiting smart. If you can backfill a little bit with the academy, that's fine. But I still don't think that that's a remit for me. Like, I'm not sitting there like, okay, how many academy players did Arteta bring through? No, I don't think that that's the most important thing or one of the most important thing. Matt G says, Jess, I think it's going to be hard for us to sign a striker in the summer. If they go to United or Chelsea, they're guaranteed to be the starting striker. At Arsenal, they have to share the minutes with Jesus. Yeah, I agree. I think that's the most important thing to remember about the striker situation is that Chelsea and United are looking for a starting number 9, and also Bayern is looking for a starting number 9. That makes a difference. So, you know, we're not in a position where we can just offer, you know, the starting position just like that. We're kind of looking for another option, but that's not an excuse not to get it done. And that's where recruitment comes in, you know, and Arsenal need to be able to convince somebody that if they work hard, that spot can be theirs, you know. And so that's the point of it. So no, you're not going to get an Osimhen, you know, you're not going to get a Kolo Muani. You're not going to get these guys. But there are other options out there that you could bring in, you know. So, but I think Arsenal need to look at it for sure. Yo-Yo says, whatever happened to the infant who broke the youngest ever Premier League player record? He's still in the under 21s, Ethan Noweri or whatever, but I don't know if he's going to stay or not, you know. Again, like, I don't really see like the academy situation being something that's like, if they're good enough, they will play. They will create a spot for them. Trust and believe that. Like, if they're good enough, they will have that person coming through, like for sure. And I don't think I've seen any academy player come through lately where I've been like, that player has got to be in the starting 11 soon or be a backup or anything like that. And I still think I'd be more leaning towards recruitment than bringing players to the academy as the most important thing for Arsenal to get to where they want to be. But yeah, Lynn says, yes, Jess City have the finances ready to buy a squad to be able to challenge the second season Pep was there, and the rest is history for us are not in. Yeah, for sure. I think, of course, like um City are in a different position financially, but also City have also could have ended up like PSG. So we can't underestimate the fact that recruitment and smart recruitment is more important than just how the financial outlay. And when you look at teams like Brighton being able to compose a team that's so good that there's no drop off between their first team and their second team and they can still play good football, that's where I kind of like really think that Arsenal fans need to like not put so much emphasis on, Manchester City are playing a different game and we can't, create a team with that type of structure and those types of what. Yes, we can. We need to recruit better, and we need to spend what we can, and I don't think that really using academy players just for the sake of it makes Arteta a better manager. I really don't. Lucas says, to be truly honest, we should be bringing players to academy to make the money on them, just like City and Chelsea. They're able to sell random goalkeepers for 20 million. Exactly. And, if they're good enough, we won't let them go. But if they make us money, I think that that's more important than, but are they in the first team? So yeah. Arsenal Forever says, if West Ham win the European Conference, then they will have a better season than us. Fair enough, if that's what you think. The idea that you just have to win a trophy to have a better season than somebody, I feel like we're making it a stretch. I feel like if they're in the top 4, like with, Man United, I feel like maybe if we finish second and they finish third and they won the Carabao Cup, then yeah, potentially, yeah, they've had a better season than us. But West Ham winning the Europa Conference League, I think the key for me, Arsenal Forever, would be, okay, so since they've had a better season, would you rather be in their position than ours? Would you rather take your Arsenal kit off, put on a West Ham kit, and have endured the season that they have and be in their position? Because if you've had a better season, then technically, then you would probably have wanted Arsenal to be in that position. So would you want Arsenal to be in, what are they, 14th, 12th, something like that? They were in a relegation scrap. And, would you prefer if Arsenal to have been in that position because it would have been a better season? No. That's when going too far, you get got, because nobody is about to sit here and tell me that they would have rather have been in West Ham's position if they win that European Conference League and would take away our entire season and would switch spots. Like, nobody would say that. Sorry. Have Man United potentially had a better season? Yeah, maybe Newcastle, because they finished maybe third and they went to a final. Yeah, maybe. But nah, not West Ham. Sorry. They're in 15th. Be for real. Yeah, so let's see what you guys are saying. Hugo Garcia says 66 points got you top 4 when Liverpool won the league, the state of the league back then. Oh, I don't care. Liverpool fans, they've won a couple of games and now they're back, but they've been missing all season. Klopp already said you guys failed this season, so there's no reason to come into our chat talking shit. I've never seen anybody so insecure than like Liverpool fans and Chelsea fans this season. All they have is Arsenal. We've been the main character in your season all season. Like, that's actually sad. McLib says United had a better season. Let's be honest. If they had a better season, then they had a better season. Like, my whole thing is like, that's never been a thing. Like, that's like a new thing now in football, is who's had a better season. If they had a better season, then they had a better season. Like, especially because like if they won a trophy, they won a trophy, they're in third, then of course you can say that they had a better season because they won silverware and we're both in Champions League. Fair enough. But like, since when has that become like a benchmark? Like, So what's going to happen? If you say that they had a better season, what's going to happen? Who cares? It's like the weirdest thing in the world. Like, so Jawan says, when people say Trossard should start, it doesn't necessarily mean in place of Jesus. He can play left wing, right wing, number 10. Also, yes, Jesus scored, but also missed plenty of chances. He missed plenty of chances against Southampton, but again, like, his issue wasn't really against like West Ham or at Anfield. For Trossard starting, when he started in right wing for Saka, nobody liked it, did they? And Martinelli is our most informed player. So again, like, it just feels like hindsight to me still, and with like, okay, second, third, and fourth are losers. Well, then West Ham is the worst loser. Like, I don't know. Arsenal forever. I do feel like you're a little bit like going over the top. Like, this is a little bit like, maybe go take a chill pill, come back. If you think West Ham had a better season if they win the Europa Conference League, nobody's going to say that but you. And if you can say without a shadow of a doubt that you'd rather come in 15th, 16th place, but then win the Europa Conference League, fair enough. But I wouldn't, just because we didn't win the league doesn't mean that I would have rather been in 15th and win the Europa Conference League. Like, be fucking for real. Like, let's be real, But yeah, Trossard, he should probably start against Chelsea. That's the truth. Like, he should start against Chelsea because obviously, like, I do think that the group that plays needs to be a group that's more motivated. I have fears that some of the guys that have been playing more minutes are going to be a little bit jaded. So, yeah, I think that Arsenal should start maybe Trossard in one of those positions up top or whatever. But I really do stand behind like the fact that when Jesus was scoring those goals, nobody wanted him out the team. And you can't take Martinelli out the team because he's our most informed player. And if you're saying that you wanted Trossard to start over Saka, I still think you're lying because he was not good on the right wing against Crystal Palace, I think it was, or Leeds. So yeah, no. So yeah. Bendover says, Jess, did you talk about the Chelsea match? We're gonna do a whole preview tomorrow. I can't be asked right now, to be honest. Like, because the season does feel like it's over, what's it called? So yeah, but I'm going to get out of here because now it's just like so many trolls in here and I don't have time for this. I'm too old to be like looking at people like LFC, you never walk alone. It's all about silverware. You don't have a clue. Ha ha ha. Like, are you in your mom's basement? Wipe the Cheetos off your face. Like, come on. Like, you're such a child. Like, it's so sad. Mr. Star Fracture says it's been pretty evident in Europa that our style of play doesn't translate against European sides. So if we don't adapt the way we play, can you see us getting knocked out of the group stages? I agree. For sure. I agree. I'm so glad I have a block button. I'm just going to get rid of him. Like, he can go bother somebody else. But yeah, I'm tired. But I did like a 2-hour stream because I love you guys, obviously. And I want to talk about Patino and transfers and all that kind of stuff. We'll do a little preview before the Chelsea game tomorrow. But make sure you guys tune into Arsenal Women because they're playing in the Champions League semifinal. They sold out the Emirates. So you guys can tune into that on YouTube. It's free. So make sure you guys tune into that if you guys are not going to the game. But like this video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll talk to you guys later. Bye, guys.